A Heroine's Beginning, Chapter 23. We reached the carriages, and James handed me into the nearest one. Jacqueline and Philip were already inside, sitting on opposite sides. I took the empty seat next to Jacqueline, and James climbed in and sat across from me. He was about to shut the door, when Pruden's face appeared, looking into the carriage. "You have space. Squeeze these two in, will you?" I looked down, and she had Lizzie and Lottie in her two hands. She quickly pulled them up the steps of the carriage and deposited them inside, before disappearing as quickly as she had appeared. No one had a chance to stop her, or say the carriage was full. I shifted slightly, and so did Jacqueline, and we found we could easily make space for one small girl. The boys on the other side, though, were larger than us, and couldn't make space to fit them in. "Stand up," I said to Philip. He looked at me curiously, but obeyed. "If we swap places, we can fit them in," I explained. Philip nodded, and with some difficulty, we managed to maneuver around the small carriage and the two small girls. I almost fell into the empty space next to James, but moved up as close to the window as I could manage in order to make space for Lizzie. She was just about to sit down, when James moved to block her path. "Would you like to sit next to the window, young lady? You could see outside, and you wouldn't be squished in the middle," James told Lizzie. She nodded, and rather excitedly sat down next to the window, and Lottie asked Philip if she could sit on the end as well. In order to accommodate Lizzie by the window, James moved up, so his side was pressed against mine. For a brief moment, the backs of our hands were pressed together uncomfortably. I could feel all of his bones. It was evident he could feel it too, and so he moved his hand upwards and rested it on top of mine. I thought I felt his fingers curl around, trying to grasp my hand, when the carriage jolted forward and displaced it. Lizzie and Lottie started talking, their small voices full of energy and excitement. I guessed it was the first wedding they had ever been a part of. They told us of their new dresses, the flowers that were in their hair, and the new dancing shoes their parents had given them. They reminded me of what Clara was like at their age. If we had been wealthy, I was sure that was exactly what would have consumed her every waking moment. Gwen would have been interested, but I think having more brothers her age had turned her into a bit of a tomboy. James was actually surprisingly good with the girls. He asked them about their day and if they were looking forward to dancing later, and generally entertained them during our short trip. I listened to their conversations and tried to add to them whenever they fell silent. As we rounded the final corner and saw the palace down the long driveway, I noticed something reach for my hand out of the corner of my eye. Before I could do anything about it, I felt James's fingers wrap themselves gently between my own. It felt nice, pleasant, and comforting. His thumb traced the shape of skin between my forefinger and thumb gently, as though it was a fragile thing and needed to be treated with great care. I was going to move my hand away from his, to further tease him, but I couldn't seem to get the message from my brain to my hand. It seemed perfectly happy to just stay there, so I gave up on the notion. James, though, seemed completely calm about it, not even looking at me while he held on, and continued to talk with the girls. I tried to ignore it the best I could, but I had never had a young man wish to hold my hand before, other than while dancing. I turned my face to look at him. I couldn't deny he was a handsome young man. He was very attractive when the smug expression disappeared from his face and was replaced with a genuine smile. When he spoke to it, it was normally in jest, but I hoped there was some emotion behind it. I caught a hold of my thoughts. I hoped for some emotion. I actually hoped for James to have an opinion of me, and I hoped it was a good opinion. I wanted him to think well of me. I cared what he thought of me. I knew what I thought of him. He was a man who put on a face of arrogance and jesting, but actually cared deeply for his friends, and was clearly very intelligent. He made me feel happy, and he made me laugh. I enjoyed being around him. I knew what I was feeling, but I did not really want to admit it to myself. However, there was no avoiding my overactive brain, once it had settled on a thought. I liked James. I really liked him, and I hoped he liked me. The carriage pulled to a stop outside the front of the palace, and the door was opened. Lizzie and Lottie were the first to disembark, followed by Philip and Jacqueline. James and I waited patiently for the two of them to pass us. I felt a pressure tighten around my hand, squeezing it, and then it was gone, and James's hand too. James quickly moved toward the door, and I followed. He climbed out deftly and offered me his hand again to help me down. We walked through the front door and stood just inside the entranceway, where Ella, Christopher, and the rest of the wedding party were stood. I finally got a chance to congratulate the happy couple. Ella looked so radiant she was almost glowing, and Christopher too. We were not alone for long, as the first of the guests started to arrive, and it was the newlyweds' job to greet them. The rest of us were moved along to make space for the new arrivals. I took the opportunity to escape the party and go in search of the nearest lavatory. The tight dress was doing nothing to help my bladder. By the time I emerged and found my way back to the ballroom, many more guests had arrived. I looked around, trying to spot anyone I knew, until I was almost knocked sideways by a small figure rushing into my legs. I looked down and found the dark hair of my baby brother Robbie. He was quickly followed by Gwen, looking truly adorable in her small pink dress.
"Marion, you look like a princess," Gwen squealed. "Do you like my new dress? I'm a princess too."
She twirled around, letting her skirt fly out in all directions.
"Yes, Gwen, your dress is lovely. And you are a little princess."
I tried to bend down, but my dress made it impossible. The rest of my family followed them, all looking very well in their fine new clothes. Clara, in particular, seemed to relish in the chance to be a high-born lady for once in her life. She did look very pretty in her lilac gown. There were purple flowers woven into her hair, and I noticed some pink ones had been fixed into Gwen's hair as well. My father walked over to embrace me. He told me I had done a fine job at the church. "If I didn't know it was you, I would have thought I was looking at a true lady. You look a lot like your mother, you know." I knew he missed Mother. He missed her every day. He had never once thought to move on, to find another wife, or at least he never admitted it to us. The pain of her passing was still evident, even after a year. He told us not to dwell on such things. It was to be a happy day of celebration, so we should enjoy it while it lasts. I spotted Lizzie and Lottie stood in the corner of the room. They were trying to sneak small cakes into their mouths before anyone noticed them. I took Gwen and Robbie by the hands and told Tom to follow. I was sure the flower girls would make great playmates for my younger siblings, and at least keep them entertained for a while. "I don't think those are for eating just yet," I told the small girls. They turned their crumb-stained faces up to me in shock. They both looked a little scared for being caught. "Don't worry, I won't tell," I whispered. "This is Gwen, Robbie, and Tom. I think they would quite like some cakes as well. Would you get some for them?" They both nodded their heads in unison, and I let go of my siblings and walked away, leaving them with the girls. As I walked back to where the rest of my family were stood, I saw the strange sight of my father, Alexander, and Richard talking to Sir James. I stopped dead in my tracks. I could actually feel the panic start to build in my stomach. I wasn't quite sure why I felt so nervous that James was talking to my family, but it didn't stop me from feeling it anyway. I approached them apprehensively. "Ah, Marion, there you are," my father called out to me. "This young man claims to be the James you said you danced with at the ball." "Please tell Mr. Brown that I'm telling the truth?" James asked me. "Yes, father, this is Sir James Thorne," I told him. "Your brother Alexander here was just telling me how much they've missed you for the past few days," James informed me. "We've missed your cooking, Ari," Alexander said. "Daniel tried to make some soup, but it was not the same." "Then clearly tomorrow I need to start giving you all some lessons. You can't depend on me forever." "But there's no rush," Father said. "Good, because next time someone tells me it's carrot soup, I actually want more carrots than hot water in my bowl," Alexander joked. "Really, Ari, you should have seen it. Daniel actually served up a bowl of hot water with some vague carrot flavoring in it." "It was true. It was disgusting," Richard piped up. I thought it strange that he spoke in front of James. Richard was very shy and didn't usually speak in front of complete strangers. The conversation lulled, until James started it up again. So I understand there are many Browns around the room. If they are all as friendly and charming as Marion here, I should like to be introduced. Well, you know me, Alexander, and Richard here, my father said, gesturing to each person in turn. Daniel and Clara are over there by the fireplace talking with Lady Jacqueline, he explained, waving his hand in their direction. My youngest three are over there by the table with those flower girls. And the youngest three are called Tom, Robert, even though we called him Robbie, and Gwyn. So correct me if I'm wrong. There is you, Mr. Brown, Marion, Alexander, Richard, Daniel, Clara, Robbie, and the last two are... Wait, I'll remember. Gwyn and Tommy? Tom, I corrected. I'm sorry, Tom. Do you have any siblings, young man? Father asked James. No, alas, I am all alone. My father is still alive, but we are not very close at all. He paid for my education, and I say hello to him when I pass him in the hall at home. But other than that, I am alone in the world. Oh, how horrible for you. No, I am quite content. I would much prefer the distance from my father than to be in his confidence. I'm afraid he never has a pleasant thing to say. I would much rather be merry and laugh far away from him. The company here is far more agreeable. James took a small sip of his drink and glanced at me. The room was almost full now. People were mingling around, chatting and adding to the atmosphere of the place. My eyes wandered, and I saw my sister Clara talking to a young man around her age. I could not see his face, only the back of his blonde head, but I saw Clara's expression. It was the same expression she had on her face when she listened to the romantic stories I would tell her in her childhood. I knew Clara. She was fanciful and a dreamer. I had feared once she got older, that the moment she met a boy, she would begin planning her wedding in her head. My head told me to interfere, but my heart wouldn't let me. Clara didn't go to the ball. She was too young at 14. She had always wanted to be a fine lady, or preferably a princess, who fell for a prince with a tragic past. This was maybe the only time she was ever going to be allowed to dress up and put on airs and graces and enjoy herself like this. So without saying anything, I turned around and left her to her own devices. The wedding celebration was about to start,